I am not ready to say goodbye to Krakoa. Since 2019, Hickman brought us the biggest magma opus he's delivered into this time period with the X-Men House of X event, the House of X and the Powers of 10. Two intertwining miniseries that would ultimately set the staging grounds for the X-Men Krakoan era, where the mutants all lived together on an island, even the more irredeemable ones, and they would all strive to fight against the inevitability of the Omega cycle. And it has been a long, perilous journey. In comic book time, that means nothing, because I would like to state that the mansion existed all the way back from the 1960s, and then it lasted until Messiah Complex, then got rebuilt, then got destroyed in Schism, and then got rebuilt, and then got destroyed in Extermination. Then the mutants then went into a schism of sorts for the X-Men, and all that stuff happened, and then they had Utopia, and then that fell. And then they first had Genosha, and that was blown up by Grant Morrison, so congrats. And I have been very pessimistic with how Marvel has handled this thing, because here's the thing. I have not read the X-Men in years. The only reason I got back into comics was for two reasons. One was Linkara on YouTube. The other was Jonathan Hickman. I read my favorite comic book event of all time is Infinity, which was written by Jonathan Hickman, which also served the basis for Infinity War in some areas, specifically the invasion of Wakanda by the army of Thanos. And I had been engrossed with everything Hickman related since. How he has this epic sprawl of storytelling across cosmos, of heroism, understanding these characters, just really showing the nooks and crannies of what makes them tick, and even showing their darker instincts against a wave of optimism. So when Hickman took over the X-Men and revamped and rebooted everything, yet still maintained all the canonicity that has happened in the X-Men's and extremely complicated lore, I was hyped. Just like when I first heard House of X was going to be written by Jonathan Hickman, I was like, take my money. You had to slap his name on there, therefore I have to read it. And I thought, okay, it's going to be an interesting, massive, complex story. And then, sure enough, we got nation building. We got Charles Xavier and Magneto teaming up. We had moments like Apocalypse coming into the scene and joining the X-Men, more or less. All the villains and heroes coming together to be one people and stop being divided. There were still some threads left open to interpretation, such as Wakanda not really recognizing their sovereignty in ways. You also had Namor the Submariner never joining Krakoa officially, and telling Xavier when he offered the amnesty was to go away, little man, don't come back until you really mean it. And then there was the rise of Orcus, a cabal of sorts, to go ahead and basically murder the entire mutant population because of the extinction theory they have for themselves. Because humanity doesn't want to cooperate, so they'll gladly work with the Hydra Nazis than be friendly with mutants, because that makes sense. Though, of course, Krakoa had its dark side, such as having Sebastian Shaw, Mr. Sinister, Nathaniel Essex running around, being in the high functions of government. And you also had Apocalypse, who seemed very mellowed out compared to his yesteryears when he was about survival of the fittest, only the strong survive. And all this conveniently happening because Disney bought Fox and therefore got back the X-Men film rights. And Krakoa is now 4 years old in 2024, and it's ending in 2024 with the fall of the House of X and the rise of the Powers of 10. Two intertwining series written not by Jonathan Hickman. He left after the events of Inferno, and the pandemic kind of changed everything up, and then the writers who were all collaborating in this event age was all thought, yeah, we want to stick around longer. So Hickman's grand plan ultimately became, okay, Hickman had this big vision, but we want money, so we want to keep it. And with the fall of the House of X and the rise of the Powers of 10 happening, Mark Brooks released a teaser poster which showcased my most dreading image I could ever imagine. The mansion. So, yeah, there has been an increasing demand from fans who don't like the mutants having their own nation and don't like this rather separatist mindset they have, their own separate nation and essentialism and all that, and they want to just go back to school. And I was just, okay, you can have that continuity, you can have that story, you can have that fandom all you want. The stories still exist. They don't say they were pointless, but we are not in the early 2000s or even in the 90s anymore. The story had to evolve in some way, or else they'd just be where they were during the fabled quote lost decade that was mentioned in House of X. But yeah, I get their frustration for this more militaristic mutant race they gave. I get it. I was excited for it, just to see this new direction, to see how all these characters mesh and feel together at trying to be a nation, even after all the horrible things they went through against each other, and not even counting all the mutant stuff. Like, they brought back Cassandra Nova, who I must stress was responsible for the mass murdering of 16 million mutants in Genosha. Remember that? And yet Scarlet Witch was condemned for several years until the trial of Magneto, which didn't really result in a trial for him. So, yeah. And there were so many stories I had loved during this era. I loved The Marauders by Gerry Duggan. I loved Zeb Wells, who is the current writer of Amazing Spider-Man, aka The Miserable Spider-Man. Because, oh my god, how do you mess this up so badly, editors? I blame Nick Lowe mostly. Zeb Wells wrote Hellions, which was, even for those who hated the Krakoan era of X-Men, said Hellions is the best title of the entire lineup, which says a lot. I enjoyed Benjamin Percy's X-Force, Wolverine. I enjoyed the New Mutants. I enjoyed so many of the stories. Here's the thing. I did something that I hadn't done as a comic book fan since ever. I bought the entire line. As in, I bought all the House of X issues, the Powers of 10. I bought the whole Destiny, the whole Dawn of X run, the Reign of X, the Destiny of X, and then I stopped halfway through the Fall of X because I did not want to say goodbye to this era. Because we initially all thought when Fall of X was happening, it was because they originally were going to call it Autumn of X, but that didn't sound as dramatically cool, so they renamed it to Fall of X. And there was reports going around that this wasn't really the end of the Krakoan era. It was just going to be a massive war between Krakoa and Orcus. And I was like, okay, I have optimism on that. But then New York Comic Con happened last year in 2023. And they said that, yes, the era of Krakoa is ending. When I heard that, I immediately cringed, because how do you go back to the mansion in Winchester, New York after everything that happened in this event of Fall of X? The humans have sided with Orcus, they've been manipulated, they've been tricked, yes, but they clearly want them all dead now. After all that, you just go back, act like Krakoa didn't happen, wash our hands, oh, that was a good experiment, but it didn't end well, so we're never gonna do it again. And we're just gonna revert back things to the way they were, all the way back from Messiah Complex, because that's the vibe I was getting from this. That everything from House of M all the way to now was all gonna be undone just to have the mansion back, just to have Xavier's School for the Gifted happen. And now the fall of the House of X has started, and I don't want this era to end. I really don't. It's been a fascinating storyline for me, and the X-Men, in my honest opinion, I've said this, deserve their own win here. Like, we've had how many comic books in the Marvel timeline throughout the Marvel Comics history have we seen nations such as Latveria survive, even though they should have been destroyed multiple times by now, if not for all the war crimes they've committed under the reign of Doctor Doom, and the very fact that they let a guy named Victor Von Doom run a nation. But the mutants, we can't have that. They let him run things around. They have Namor the Submariner running Atlantis. They've had Wakanda that's had fallen multiple times and then just come back up. The mutants try just to have their own piece of home, and the humans are like, nope, you can't have that. You cannot be happy. You cannot have your own thing. That's against the human law, apparently. And this further built up when Jordan D. White, the current editor of the X-Men books, was stepping down, and Tom Brevoort, I'm pretty sure I failed to pronounce his name right, was stepping in to take over. I was initially like, okay, he did a lot of stuff when Hickman was doing things with the Avengers, and that was a phenomenal run. He did things with the Fantastic Four. Okay, fine. He was the editor of all those stories. And then I found out certain details about him and his viewpoints on the mutants. So, from old posts he made back in the day, he expressed his not so fandom love for certain characters that fans really love. Reportedly, he is not a fan of Jean Grey, who I must stress is one of the original X-Men all the way back from the beginning. He's not a fan of Emma Frost, who many people love, and he's especially not a fan of Illyana Rasputin, aka Magik. So, when you hear that the editor does not like certain characters, your initial thought was like, okay, he doesn't like certain characters. Well, it's been years, okay? Maybe they moved on, or maybe they're just accepting that they exist. Like, here's the thing, I'm not perfect, but here's my comparison. I am not a fan of Nightwing and Barbara Gordon being a couple. I'm not a fan of Dick Grayson and Barbara Gordon being a couple. I felt it was just too much of an easy pairing to do, and it just continuously homogenizes the Batman lore because it's so easy to do. I always was more of a fan of Coriander and Dick Grayson being a couple because it's much more interesting, and it's also probably because of my love for the Teen Titans cartoon all the way back in 2003. So I still have that little nostalgic bias in my head. But here's the thing, I could at least tolerate, and if I was a comic writer, I would be like, okay, I don't like this pairing, but I'm going to give it the respect it deserves because a lot of people love it. I'm here to tell a story. I'm not here to deliver my own power fantasies out of this. However, Tom reported in his old newsletter, and it's still up to this day, talks about how he doesn't really like Illyana Rasputin Magik, and that would be alright, but he's also said that if he could, he'd drop a brick of concrete on her head and kill her. And I was like, oh god, it's another Dan DiDio hates Wally West thing, isn't it? Because that was an old post he had written back in from an old newsletter from like the early mid 2000s, and then he did an edit from it about years later in 2014 when Rasputin was back, and they decided, and he just went ahead and said, Magik's back, yay, which kind of gives off that he still hates the character for some reason. And that's been now my increased worry, because if he still hates certain characters, he's going to editorially control everything to the point that certain characters won't be around to be their prominent roles as they are known for. And add that we're going backwards to the mansion. And here's the thing I feared most. When I heard the X-Men were having that big anime series revival, X-Men 97, which would be the continuation of the X-Men anime series that everyone loves so much, I was like, okay, so we got 2 years until Krakoa is over. Maybe 3 if there's a delay. There's a time limit now, because the moment that happened, I was like, okay, Krakoa's not going to survive 10 years. They can't even be given that, because Marvel Comics has this obsession, and I get it to an extent. I get it to a great extent. They want to sell their comic. They do. It's a business, after all. At the end of the day, they're here to make money. But they seem to have forgotten that they're trying to tell stories as well with the money. But when the policy of Marvel is, okay, we got the successful MCU, we got all these Marvel properties that are in the mainstream, so we need to make our comics have synergy with that. Which is why Kamala Khan is no longer an Inhuman, she's now also a mutant. And it's the reason why Thor is the way he is now. It's the reason why so many characters were given so many prominent features. It's why the X-Men were pushed back and shoved to the wayside after being the crown jewel of Marvel from the 90s and early 2000s, because, oh, well, we gotta represent the MCU in the thing. We need to put more focus on these characters who are in our MCU world, even though they're not the same characters from the MCU. Like, they have the identities, the characteristics, but they're not really the same characters, so to speak, because they have a completely different history compared to the characters we grew to love in the MCU. So yeah, that's been sort of this push and pull over Marvel and the fan base. Like I said, there are fans who are not a fan of the Krakoan era, did not like the X-Men becoming so militaristic and separatist nation build. But it was progress. It was actually a progress we were getting with these characters. And to now go back just because we got an anime series on the horizon, or because we got the movies coming in the future, we gotta go backwards. We gotta re-synergize our comics with the movies. What do you think? We're supposed to be our own separate entity? Heck, we're even calling the MCU Earth 616. And this Earth is also Earth 616 because, I don't know, Doctor Strange's Multiverse of Madness needed to go ahead and reference Earth 616 because it's cool, even though we clearly have no respect for everything that came before with comics half the time. So, yeah, as much as the studios borrowed elements of the comics, they tended to do their own thing. And the reason why I think people loved Krakoa so much is because it was a comic book thing. It wasn't a movie build-up synergy thing. It wasn't a limited series event. It was a status quo. To go back is to just go back, and it's just like, then what was the point of being invested? What was the point? I am dreading this era, and I think it's also problematic because of how Marvel's promoting the fall of the House of X event with the Rise of Powers of 10, is because whereas House of X and Powers of 10 by Jonathan Hickman started off as two intertwining miniseries with Pepe Larraz, RB Silva, and Marty Gracia doing all the artwork and colors, the fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10 is more of an event comic than it is its own corner of the Marvel Universe comic. Because now, almost every single title in the Marvel Universe is starting to get into this. There are now tie-ins to what should be a self-contained 10-issue miniseries. Because that's what Fall of the House of X and Rise of the Powers of 10 is. 5 issues separate, intertwining, but ultimately a 10-issue event that would come out with 2 different writers, Gerry Duggan and Kieron Gillen, who wrote X-Men, Marauders, and Immortal X-Men respectively. And they are good books. They're good books. I think Immortal X-Men is one of my favorite mutant-focused politic books in a long time. A very centric character piece stories that focuses on the political intrigue of the Krakoan Empire, which I kind of wish stuck around more, and we got more of this introspective politicking going on in the world of mutants. And Pepe Larraz is not part of this, so that sucked. But Lucas Rednick is taking over for the Fall of the House of X story, but Pepe Larraz is providing the cover art. And RB Silver's back for the Rise of the Powers of 10, so at least they're keeping some of the old crew together just for this big finale, though Pepe Larraz not doing the interiors is a travesty. Because he's doing a Blood Hunt event at Marvel with Blade and the vampire stuff for the Avengers, which comes out after this X-Men event ends. And the Avengers will also be joining in on the fight in their own tie-in issue, because of course. We also have Dead X-Men, which is set to be a miniseries that focuses on the X-Men that were killed at the Hellfire Gala in the most brutal way possible, as they work to stop the inevitable and clearly fail because we're clearly going back to the mansion. And we also got X-Men Forever, which is the Immortal X-Men continuation that focuses on the last dark secrets of Krakoa by Kieron Gillen. We also got resurrection of Magneto, who has been dead since the events of Avengers X-Men Eternals event Judgment Day, and Storm is about to go on a mission to resurrect Magneto since the easier ways are pretty much dead and gone, where the Five just brought them back easily, and they also destroyed their backups in X-Men Red, so there's that. It's an interesting time, but also fills me with plenty of dread, because it's just, after this, I didn't want to, this was the worst case scenario people had back in Inferno when Hickman was leaving. They thought, okay, they're going back to the mansion, we're done. And many dropped off, but then Krakoa persisted. And now the mansion's coming back and Krakoa is gonna stop. And I'm here saying to myself, do I even want to continue doing this? Going back to a status quo I just was no longer interested in? That I just wanted these characters to truly evolve and be more and have something interesting and new that doesn't have to tie in with synergy with a bunch of other properties that have nothing to do with what's going on in the comic side of the universe. Yeah, but yeah, I'm pretty sure this is just me been rambling about this whole stuff, but this was just a video piece I had to get out of my system and finally move forward with stuff as 2024 takes over. I'm probably sticking around to see the final issues of this event, and once House of X and Powers of 10 Fall and Rise happens, and once that's concluded, I'm more than likely dropping everything. I said this before. I said, if we're just going to go back to school, what's the point of me staying? Because I wanted us to have characters that move forward, not go back to an old status quo that really should have been moved past the Marvel editorial staff said otherwise. So I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see. The Fall of the House of X is starting in January. Rise of the Powers of 10 also starts the week after, and then they'll be around for another couple of months, so they're trying to stretch this out as much as they can. We'll see what happens, but if things go the way I'm thinking they're going, yeah, I think it's safe to say. This was your host, Eric Brown of NRE, of Neo Reality Collective. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, check out my other content, go follow me on Twitter, still calling it that, suck it Elon Musk, and I'll see y'all again next time. Take care, and I hope you enjoyed this piece.